Fallacies. Most of the fallacies we're going to talk about today aren't logically logically inconsistent, internally inconsistent arguments like affirming the consequent, which I will talk about in the theories lecture coming up, where you have if P then Q, Q therefore P. Don't worry, I'll explain what that. Stay tuned. I'll explain what that means in the next lecture. That's a logically internally illogical argument. Most of these fallacies are just arguments that can't stand on their own. They may be the beginning of a good argument. They may, combined with other evidence and arguments, contribute to an overall strong position, but by themselves they cannot stand on their own, and so they are not good arguments. The first one we look at is false analogy, and as I mentioned, this is on pages 70 through 72 of the S textbook, Digital Media Ethics. Like I said when we talked about validity and soundness, we look at the downloading music without paying for it argument, and it goes like this: unlicensed music downloading is the same as shoplifting a CD from a store. Shoplifting is wrong, therefore unlicensed music downloading is wrong. I think a good case can be made that the first premise, that first sentence, is a false analogy. Analogy is just when you say one thing is like another thing, like that sentence does. That downloading music without paying for it is like shoplifting. And I can see why someone would make this argument. You can see similarities between downloading music without paying for it and taking a CD without paying for it. You get music without paying for it, whereas other people pay for it, and it doesn't seem to be fair. But I think it is incorrect to say that it is the same as stealing, because when you take a CD from a store without paying for it, you're depriving that owner of capital she or he invested in. And so that owner no longer has that capital and cannot make a profit off of it. So the owner loses something. When you download music without paying for it, without purchasing the license or whatever, the same goes with software and movies and anything like that, ebooks, then you're making a copy of a file. And the owner still has that file. You just have a copy of it. I think a way to illustrate this better would be to create a better analogy. And I think the better analogy is as follows. There are 3D printers out now that are kind of in a beta stage that they're pretty impressive. I mean, you can scan a wrench, and the printer will take these foam pellets and create a wrench based on the scanned image with moving parts and everything. But it's kind of, it's usually big and kind of clunky looking, and doesn't have the same color as the wrench. It's not the same material, but it has moving parts in it. It's pretty amazing. Let's say we have one that's extremely advanced and it's tiny. You can walk into a CD store, and CDs still exist at this point, even though we have this amazing technology that can make perfect copies of things, 3D objects, and this thing can scan a CD. It can recreate the wrapper on the box. It can recreate the insert, the digital code on the CD and everything. And you walk out of the store with this perfectly copied CD. Now, is that stealing? It seems like it'd be strange to say that's stealing because you didn't take anything out of the store. You just made a copy of merchandise in it and left with the copy that you made. That's not to say it isn't wrong. That's not to say that it's not that it's a morally okay thing to do. But it just seems like saying that it's stealing is a strange thing to say. And like I said, Tavani covers this in more detail on page 232 of one of our textbooks. So revisit that. The next fallacy we look at is false dichotomy. A dichotomy is when you say give a choice between two things, and it uses the conjunction or. There are two types of ors. There is an inclusive or and an exclusive or. Inclusive or is like when you say and or, this and or that, and slash or. So let's look at an example. Unlicensed music downloading is right or it is wrong. If you're using an inclusive or here, you're saying that it might be okay in some circumstances, but not in others. An exclusive or says that it gives you a choice between two things and says it can either be one thing but not the other. And it usually begins with the word either. So either unlicensed music downloading is right or it is wrong. It can't be both under any circumstances. So a false dichotomy is an incorrect use of the exclusive or. Let's look at an example. Either unlicensed music downloading is stealing or it is okay. This is false because it might not be stealing, but it still might be wrong. It doesn't have to be stealing to be wrong. Or it might be stealing, but it still might be okay in certain circumstances, and that would entail that stealing is okay in certain circumstances. I think a good case can be made that stealing food to feed a starving child, if there's no other way to pay for the food, is morally permissible. I think it would be morally permissible to steal the Nazi encryption typewriter to decipher Nazi code and win World War II for the Allied powers. That seems like a morally justifiable instance of stealing. Slippery slope. This is on Tavani, page 92. This is a very commonly referenced fallacy, and it means what it sounds like. It says that if this one thing happens, that this whole cascade of other things are going to happen. So it's a slippery slope. You're going to slide down. If you take this one step, you're going to slide down the slope. And again, this is one of those where it may be the beginning of a good argument. It may be the case that this one thing happens, that this cascade of other things are going to happen. But just saying that is not a good argument. You have to provide evidence for it. You have to build on that. You can't just say that and expect it to be taken seriously. And a good example is that is one that comes up during election years, it seems like, concerning same-sex marriage. And I'm not taking a position on this or arguing that the conclusion is incorrect. I'm just saying that when this argument is made without further support, it is a slippery slope fallacy. And it goes like this. If same-sex couples are allowed to legally marry, then we will have to legally marry any number of things, like we have to allow incestuous marriages and polygamy and polyandrous relationship marriage and bestial marriages and marriage between inanimate objects and people. Again, not saying that that conclusion is false, but I'm saying that this argument is a bad argument. It's a slippery slope.